Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stoliarov II, and I am the chairman of the US Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our US Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. Today is August 2nd, 2026, and we are pleased to offer you a conversation with a candidate seeking our endorsement. 2026 has been an unprecedented year in terms of the number of endorsements that the US Transhumanist Party has offered to candidates seeking office at various levels throughout the United States. And part of that has been assisted by our coalition with the US Pirate Party, All Hands for a Free Future. But always we want to engage with the candidates ourselves and have in-depth conversations with them and understand what they stand for, understand how that relates to the US Transhumanist Party platform and the positions expressed therein. You can always read the US Transhumanist Party platform at this link, transhumanist-party.org/platform. For many of you, that will be a refresher, but for some of you who are new to our salons, that may be the first time you encounter some of these ideas. So I am joined today by our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia, and our special guest is Jacob Anders. Jacob is running as a candidate for U.S. Congress for the 4th Congressional District in the state of Tennessee. And his campaign has the slogan, Humanity First, which is, of course, very intriguing for transhumanists. We focus on advancing the future of humanity, and transhumanism I have always seen to be a logical extension and extrapolation of humanism in the 21st century, in the age of accelerating technology in which we live. Jacob is an author, historian, voice actor, and game developer, a man of many talents, based in Marion County, Tennessee. He was previously elected as a Marion County delegate for Bernie Sanders, and then as a commissioner in Marion County, where he delivered results for his community with common sense governance. He has served for various political campaigns, such as for Ron Paul, Bernie Sanders, Doug Jones, Michelle Lujan Grisham, Andrew Yang, and Marianne Williamson. Having previously engaged in local civic life, Jacob Anders now focuses his energy on journalism, history, and political activism. He is passionate about European history, one of my interests as well, and continues to contribute to the growth and success of the Tennessee Valley. And as another similarity, in 2023, Jacob was officially knighted by the Principality of Sealand as Sir Jacob Christopher Anders. So welcome, Sir Jacob Christopher Anders. I am actually a baron of the Principality of Sealand, and it's a bit out of the scope of this frame, but I have a certificate of noble title from the Principality of Sealand that was issued back in 2012. So I have a title of nobility from this micronation, the Principality of Sealand. Everyone should look it up if you aren't already familiar with it, but it has actually existed since the 1960s, and you can get a title of nobility from it the old-fashioned way, which is by purchase, which is actually how a lot of historical titles of nobility were obtained. So welcome, Jacob. I would like to give you the opportunity to provide an overview of your campaign, the key ideas that you stand for, the key positions that you advocate in your own words, and then we will take this salon from there.
Well, thank you so much for having me. That was a great introduction. Just awesome. one thing I want to make clear about humanity first, I didn't coin the slogan. That was Andrew Yang in his 2020 presidential campaign, where Donald Trump would say America first, and Andrew Yang would say, okay, what about humanity first? So I took that idea and ran with it, because I've also, like you said, I've supported Ron Paul and Bernie Sanders as well. So I don't just see it as where, Andrew Yang, they called him kind of a centrist, kind of a tech guy, because he didn't support full universal health care and all the other things that people like me are wanting. I think it's like the majority of Americans now when they ask about it. So my platform is, again, neither left nor right, not even really centrist, just forward, because most of the people I see get labeled centrist are just for very incremental change. And I'm not just for incremental change, I'm for an overhaul of change. I want to be able to bring together people from all walks of life, all political spectrums. That's why my platform includes universal health care, UBI, slashing the federal income tax from normal people, getting us out of these crazy alliances with Israel, Saudi Arabia. I value our defensive alliance with NATO. I'm running as an independent in Tennessee, so I'm just trying to advocate for what the majority of Americans want, and the two parties that represent, pretty much every representative in Congress and the Senate. I'm just trying to get outside that duopoly.
Yes, thank you very much, Jacob, for that overview. And there are many areas that you touched on that we are going to delve into today. But getting outside of the duopoly is crucial, in my view. And the US Transhumanist Party very much also seeks to transcend this distinction between right and left, which has really caused American politics to stagnate. And to your point, we also do not call ourselves centrist, though we do have some individual members who subscribe to centrist views, just as we have individual members who subscribe to more left-wing views and more right-wing views. But as an organization, we consider ourselves to be upwing. So we want to transcend these left-right distinctions altogether, and we want to focus on constructive long-term solutions that can actually resolve the problems that are facing our country and our society, instead of turning those problems into wedge issues, instead of turning those problems into talking points by which people are classified or by which their identities are defined. So it's always refreshing to speak to someone who is solutions oriented. And one aspect that I like about your biography is that you have worked with such a wide range of candidates, people who are as different from one another as Ron Paul and Bernie Sanders, yet who have had a certain similarity in the sense that they were willing to fundamentally challenge certain premises of the political establishment that really need to be challenged. And of course, Andrew Yang is well known to transhumanists. He was the second candidate in US politics to propose a universal basic income, because the first one was Zoltan Istvan, the founder of the US Transhumanist Party in 2014 to 2016 when he ran for president. And his UBI was very interesting. It was very distinctive from other UBI proposals, and the US Transhumanist Party Platform still holds to that view of how a UBI would be funded. And that is through what Zoltan called a federal land dividend, in that the federal government owns vast amounts of land that is completely unused. And while the federal government does allow private businesses to have some limited uses of certain land, the vast majority of the land is locked away. Like 84% of the land in Nevada is federally owned. And I wouldn't be surprised if absolutely nothing is done with 70% of the land in Nevada. So the idea of the federal land dividend is private corporations would lease this land for a limited time period and subject to environmental safeguards and requirements to not pollute and clean up any byproducts of their activity. And in exchange for the right to lease that land and essentially set up their business activities on it, they would pay money to the federal government, and that money would go to fund a UBI. So it's similar to the Alaska Permanent Fund concept, where Alaska has its oil revenues, and the oil revenues are considered the property of the people of the state of Alaska. And Alaska is able to give anywhere from a few hundred to a few $1,000s a year to its people. Andrew Yang has cited this program as an inspiration because it is universally popular in Alaska. So Republicans embrace it, Democrats embrace it, independents embrace it. Nobody is really against it. And that's a proof of concept for how a UBI could work. Another proof of concept is what a lot of the oil-rich states do, whether they're Norway or the Gulf states, in that they have sovereign wealth funds from which the citizens will receive payments or support for social services. Now, your UBI idea is interesting. The way you describe it on your website, which, by the way, is jacobanders.org, an easy link to remember. So everyone, please check out jacobanders.org. You would like to see the UBI funded by reductions in wasteful military spending. And that is definitely another problem that we need to address, because for decades, because of the system of contracting that exists, there's been a lot of padding in the military budget. It's not even about what military capabilities the US would have. It's about, do we pay $750 for a toilet seat, which an audit of the Pentagon discovered in the 1980s? So I agree that there's likely enough waste to be cut there for the savings to be translated into a universal basic income. But if you could discuss that idea in greater depth and how you think about universal basic income, what you hope to accomplish, and a bit more detail about how you would fund it.
Well, I've shamelessly stolen Andrew Yang's funding, which is also implements a VAT, value-added tax, on luxury goods. So you would see it's essentially like a sales tax for luxury items, and then tech companies. And I don't think Andrew Yang foresaw the infrastructure and what AI was going to be doing so soon. Like, he kind of knew it was coming. He didn't know the details, but he's like, it's coming. The jobs are going away, and there needs to be a solution for when this happens. And people were like, well, we don't need that. It's not happening. Back then, a little bit after 2020, AI was making pictures that just looked like abstract, bad Picasso paintings. It was terrible. And people were like, no, AI is a joke. It's never going to happen. And then over the past 3 years, we've seen slowly it's gotten better and better. That people like to make fun of AI photos because they had the number of fingers wrong. Well, they patched that. And the acceleration of AI in the workplace that we've seen, my physical therapists, they use AI to summarize their notes. What is it? Entry-level jobs in the white-collar section. There's all the entry and junior positions are going away because they're getting AI to handle their stuff. And that's not even considering what's coming next. We don't know what's coming next, but we know that it's being worked on. So UBI, Universal Basic Income, the proposal that Andrew Yang floated was $1,000 a month. And I'm still proposing that because it's a big round whole number that you can grasp your mind around. You know, if I get into Congress and I'm working with the left and the right trying to figure out how we're going to do it, they're probably going to try to water it down to 800, 700, 500. You know, I'm not going to sit here and lie and say it's 1,000. That's what's going to be. That's what's going to happen. But if we actually get it passed and get it more into the zeitgeist of what people are talking about and the, you know, consciousness of people that, hey, this is an idea we can do, then it gets easier to do in the future. And the way I see it, it's like, okay, do we want to talk about this now and start figuring out how we're going to fund and implement it now? Or do we wait until the 2030s when the AI is replacing even more jobs? And then you're just going to have all these people out of work with nothing to do. The economy might recover in the 2030s. There's no guarantee. It's just there's just no plan from the two current parties. They're busy arguing over, you know, current day problems and not thinking about what's to come. So, just think it empowers single parents. It empowers people that are linked to their job and they can't leave their job. Like if you're working somewhere and you want to move, well, it's like, okay, well, I have to find a job over where I'm going to move and get that secured. And if this doesn't go through, I'm really screwed. So it gives people a bit of a safety net to keep them just above the bottom. It just gives you a little bit to keep you going. You get the universal basic income whether you're working or not. And it's also optional. So if you're really rich and you're like, I don't want a government handout, keep that away from me, you can decline it. I believe universal basic income would also help women trapped in bad situations because they're like, well, where am I supposed to go? Maybe my parents aren't around anymore. It's like, well, if you get out of this situation, you'll at least have your UBI, give you a little bit of a floor and not just be stuck in a car. Sorry, talking about that's rough, but I just think it's a necessity now and in the future to strengthen our country and our economy. If everybody's getting this extra money, then they can spend it locally. People could decide, hey, I have this floor of money. I could quit my crappy job and start a small business, see where it goes. I believe it gives you more of the freedom to fail. So if your small business or decide to become a writer or an author or an artist, you have the opportunity to do it and you have a little stipend to keep you going while you do it. And then you see if you sink or swim. See if you sink or swim. And if you sink, at least you can fall back and not be, financially devastated. There's so many good reasons to do it. And the most common question I get is, well, how are you going to pay for it? So, like I said, we're going to have a lot of revenue from corporations and AI here in the future. And we have to tap into it and send it back to the people.
Yes, thank you very much for your response. And I think you made some apt points, in particular as to the incentive effects of UBI. So I think a lot of people have negative experiences with the current welfare system or unemployment benefit system because it's conditional and it essentially requires a person to be unemployed to collect the benefits, which creates some perverse incentive effects because let's say the unemployment benefits, they're going to be modest, but if they are, let's say, at minimum wage, and then somebody can get a job that pays $1 more per hour than the minimum wage, And from everybody's standpoint, it would be good for that person to get that job. It would mean they're more productive, they're contributing their efforts, but it's also good for them. But they're disincentivized from getting that job because they think, well, I can sit around for 8 hours at home and do nothing and get that unemployment benefit, even though I may have to prove that I'm looking for a job, that'll still take a while. But if I take that job now, I'll get an hour, a dollar per hour more, essentially. But now I have to work 8 hours a day. So for a lot of people, that's not a worthwhile trade-off. But in a UBI system, they would get that UBI no matter what, whether they had a job or they didn't have a job. And as a result, they might see that slightly above minimum wage job, and they would see all of that money minus taxes, but we'll talk about the taxation aspect too. They would see all of that money being added to their revenue stream. And that would motivate them to take that job. But also, as you pointed out, some people would see the UBI as a cushion in the event that they might experience involuntary unemployment, or they might want to transition to a different job, a different line of work. They might want to become self-employed. They might want to do something that is artistically creative or higher risk that might fail. But then if it fails, they will not be destitute. They will still have some sort of floor underneath them. So all of these are valid arguments for a UBI, and then the impact of automation should be taken into account. We had a fascinating discussion with our friend Jason Mallory on October 16th, 2022, and he was essentially proposing to fund a UBI through the proceeds of automation. And his system to do so was rather elaborate, and I think it required certain categorizations that might be difficult to sustain in practice. Your system seems to be a bit more flexible, but it does involve some component of harnessing this automation to pay for the UBI. Before, you mentioned the wasteful military spending on your website, but then you also mentioned this value-added tax on luxury goods, and a large portion of your campaign ideas do pertain to reforming the tax system. So there would be some tax cuts, and then there would be some tax increases or additional taxes. I would be curious to hear more about this value-added tax on luxury goods, and what would be a luxury good in particular, because I think a lot of people might have different definitions of that. So for example, in the Soviet Union, or in the immediate years after the Soviet Union fell apart, something like a Western article of clothing could be seen as a luxury good, or some sort of like vinyl record from the Beatles. They might have been snuck into the country. Later on, when I was a kid, it was computers and computer games. Those were seen as luxury goods because they weren't easy to get, or like a Lego set. So a lot of basic necessities of life were cheaper in the former USSR than they are in the US. But anything that was seen as, let's say, optional, like say a Lego set could cost $100 over there if it cost $100 in the United States, but most people would make like $300 or $400 a month, or the equivalent thereof. So that would be a luxury good for them. So in your view, what would be a luxury good for the United States in the 2020s that would be subject to this tax?
That's a very good question. Do we base it on the type of item or the price of the item? Because what is luxury clothing? I don't think a $40 pair of work jeans or work boots is luxury. But of course, there's these designer brand handbags, cost thousands of dollars. I would say that's definitely a luxury. But then your regular purse that you might buy from Walmart, that's not really a luxury good. I would say high-end televisions, high-end electronics should be subject to the luxury tax or luxury tax, value-added tax, and classified as luxury goods. You raise a great point that I have not hammered out. It's just an idea that I have on paper that I'm definitely willing to be flexible about, because you can't just go into Congress saying, here's my idea, here's my plan, everyone sign on to it or we're not doing it. You have to work with the people that you got. And the points you raised would definitely be the points raised in hammering out this bill. So I definitely think you have to look at the price of an item and how much is it optional. I mean, are golf clubs optional? I mean, athletics and sports are kind of a good thing to do, but a golf cart, that's going to run you a couple thousand. So, I'd say also a lot of furniture would probably qualify. And of course, if you're buying furniture secondhand off of Facebook, there's not going to be a tax there. That's a private sale. So I'm definitely open and flexible to figuring out exactly which items fall into the category.
Yes, thank you for that response. And indeed, it seems like for this proposal, what you would want to do is essentially develop a white paper and a set of criteria for what would be a luxury good. And indeed, I would say, especially these days in the United States, my impression is a lot of consumer goods are actually inexpensive relative to people's incomes. And even if they have capabilities that would be considered really exclusive, say 30 years ago or 40 years ago, if you think of cell phones, or even if you look back into the 1970s or 1980s, most people didn't have desktop computers. So now those would be considered routinely accessible. I would say if you pursue this idea, it's better to not consider functional goods as luxury, but rather look at, say, brand names. So if there's a designer handbag that costs $1,000, but it only costs $100 to make, and the $900 is because somebody put Gucci onto the bag. Now, I have no idea what Gucci handbags actually cost, and perhaps some of the viewers might think it's ridiculous to suppose that a Gucci handbag only costs $1,000. Maybe they cost $5,000, but I don't know. But maybe looking at those kinds of items might make more sense if that's the approach you take. But there are other avenues for funding a UBI as well. You may want to consider some sort of natural resource related approach as well. So we have a comment here from Kevin Bransaforti, who writes, I am in favor of all citizens in a city or state sharing the value of an asset they own in common. But he writes, I am not in favor of UBI if it means that someone working hard is paying for these benefits. So that would be in opposition to a redistributive approach. But the idea for some of the natural resource approaches is the natural resources are going to be extracted anyway. It's a matter of who benefits from their value. And likewise with automation. So some have proposed some approach where if certain segments of the economy are completely or almost completely automated, there could be a UBI to accompany that to enable people to buy the products of those automated industries. And even certain entrepreneurs, even say somebody like Mark Zuckerberg, have taken an interest in creating a UBI based on those kinds of proceeds. Now, Kevin also notes one person's luxury goods are another person's medicine or supplements, so probably not a good idea to tax anything related to health. And different people may have different understandings of what they need health-wise. But he says, I am greatly in favor of much broader safety nets, but also to consider there are many people who will not work if they do not have to. And if people don't work, this could drive inflation, which would negate the effect of the UBI. One reason why the federal land dividend is promising is because it will result in more resources being generated or extracted, and it's from those proceeds that a UBI would be funded. So some thinking along the lines of how to get that UBI when real value is created to essentially channel that into some sort of basic income for people, but it wouldn't just be redistributive. It wouldn't just be a handout from existing wealth or resources, because that could be inflationary indeed. And we have other interesting comments as well. So Luis Arroyo says the Alaska example is a good one, and that's a good angle that can appeal to people across the board, as we mentioned. Now, he does wonder, what about this comment about the left watering down a UBI? He says, interesting, I'd imagine they increase it. Now, there is a counterexample to that. So when in the early COVID pandemic, the Congress was discussing the emergency payments, interestingly enough, Donald Trump actually wanted unconditional payments to all Americans, somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000. Now, this was an emergency set of payments. It wasn't intended to be a permanent universal basic income, but Trump was actually open to it just being a check written to everyone. And the Democrats actually were the ones who insisted on income eligibility thresholds that I thought were unreasonable for two main reasons. One, they were based on 2018 income tax returns. So somebody had to have a job in 2018 and to have submitted an income tax return in that year in order to qualify, which means if somebody, say, was under the threshold for submitting an income tax return, they wouldn't qualify. And then there was an upper limit on income, which was actually fairly low. So a lot of middle-class people were excluded from those payments. I didn't qualify, for example. And that threshold was set in the very, very low six figures of income. So it wasn't universal, and it may have helped some people, but it definitely missed even a lot of the people who needed the help the most, the people who might not have had jobs in 2018. So very interesting to consider that a UBI is not an idea that cuts neatly across traditional partisan lines. In fact, one of the first proponents of a UBI-like structure was actually Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman was a free market economist who proposed what he called a negative income tax. And the idea was that people earning income under certain thresholds would receive supplementary payments via the income tax system instead of just having to pay taxes into the system and then get unemployment benefits. And he thought, again, that that would remove the disincentive from seeking paid employment. He almost convinced Richard Nixon to do it. But again, there was partisan opposition from guess which party to the negative income tax concept. And it didn't ultimately get implemented. So those are just some interesting observations, that it is not the case that the left always supports a UBI and the right always opposes a UBI. I think there are other considerations in place. And I'd invite your comments on that, and then perhaps we'll bridge into the taxation discussion.
Just to address the one commenter talking about being disincentivized to work, think about the 2030s. Jobs are going to be gone. I mean, unless you're a blue collar worker, you're working a skilled trade such as plumbing, day labor. Your job's secure. Robots aren't going to be robots aren't going to be laying brick for a while, but I'm sure big tech's working on it. So this is a floor for normal people, stay at home moms, people that are caretakers for maybe an elderly or disabled relative. And to get to what you said about consolidating all of the welfare and all of the bureaucracy that goes into that actually disincentivizes people to work, where it's like, oh, if I work a certain number of hours, then I'm going to lose these benefits. So I should work less hours, even though I feel like maybe I could. It's just, that's a horrible system. And people have criticized it for decades now, and nothing's been done. It's either Republicans trying to take away the total benefits or Democrats trying to add to the benefits, and neither side wants to talk about the bureaucracy. There's all these phone calls and appointments you have to keep up with. If you're on SSI disability, they want to know every little bit of income that you have. And I think they exempt like a small amount, but anything over that, they'll take half of that out of your disability check. And it's like, well, what if you're disabled, but you could be a Walmart greeter, or you sought self-employment, maybe in art, computer design. I mean, I've always been very concerned with how our social welfare system disincentivizes people to work. I mean, you might be poor, you might need assistance, but you might also have time to work. Especially for people that are parents. Parents are one of the major recipients of food stamps. And, maybe your work situation changes. Like the kids are in school for most of the year, but then during the summer, they're home. They're kind of a little bit old enough to watch themselves. And you're thinking, hey, maybe I'll take up a job at the gas station or the box store. And you do that, and then you get a little love letter in the mail saying, hey, we're taking away your food stamps. Seems like you're doing really good now. It's like, wait, whoa, no. I was just doing something seasonal. It's a terrible system. I'm not quite sure who came up with all the means testing, but our safety nets have lifted people out of poverty, kept people from hitting rock bottom. But then the people that are wanting to rejoin the workforce in some form or fashion are completely discouraged from it. And I don't think anybody supports that. No one I know supports that. So it's definitely something we have to change.
Yes, the current bureaucracy around the unemployment benefits often costs more money than the benefits themselves. And interestingly enough, this was a point made by another conservative figure whom I met back in 2007 when I was a student at Hillsdale College. He attended there as a guest speaker. Charles Murray. Charles Murray wrote this book entitled In Our Hands. In the mid to late 2000s, he was advocating for a universal basic income. And he's essentially a conservative libertarian. That's how he would describe himself. And he said, essentially, the libertarian case for a basic income is that it could replace all of this welfare bureaucracy, which costs more money to administer than the benefits themselves. And he estimated, essentially, that if all of the money that had been spent on the welfare bureaucracy were just given to the same recipients, they would each get something like $23,000 a year. So, and they would have gotten that for decades.
So we're talking about people that, I mean, no shade to you if you work as a food stamp intake call person or client representative, whatever. But they definitely get large salaries. I mean, they always say a government job is a good job, but is it really necessary? Do we need to set up all these phone calls and appointments? I mean, you're already talking about somebody that's poor. They already probably have kids and don't have the time to be setting up these appointments. And then sometimes they want documentation. They're like, okay, well, what is your rent? Can you go get a copy of that? And for a lot of people, it's like, well, I mean, I don't have a lease. I just kind of like rent a bedroom from someone I know. Like, I'm freaking poor. Like, it's just a giant hassle and a waste of time that could be better spent on something else.
Indeed. And Luis Arroyo writes, he can confirm the government wants to know everything about people who get SSI benefits. It keeps people below the poverty line, it seems. And that's the thing with the current system. I would almost caution people against getting those benefits if they can avoid it because of the intrusive nature of the monitoring and the restrictions on a person's life. Another fact that I think is well known by many, but perhaps not by all, say Medicaid. If you receive Medicaid, you essentially have to impoverish yourself before becoming eligible for it. You have to sell any assets that you have or not accumulate many assets and essentially live on whatever stipend Medicaid gives you, because if you have more assets than that, then they just deem that, oh, you can afford to pay for healthcare out of pocket. Why don't you sell this house that you live in first before we can give you Medicaid? So that is, I think, a serious shortcoming of current systems. And Kevin Bransford writes, I'm in favor of cutting government processes and getting support to people in a better way. And I think that's what the essence of this discussion is. How can we do something that's better than the current system? Now, speaking of which, another aspect of the current system that is suboptimal, to say the least, is the taxation system. Because originally, even the income tax was meant to encapsulate like the wealthiest of the business elites, the tycoons, the industrialists. But when the income taxes were initially implemented after 1913, it was found that a lot of these people could essentially implement tax shelter schemes. And so they hid a lot of their wealth from the reach of the federal government. And as a result, the tax brackets kept expanding to include more and more individuals until the vast majority of even lower middle class taxpayers have been encompassed. And I have often said, for me, the most annoying part of income taxation isn't actually paying the taxes. It's filing the convoluted income tax returns at the end of the year. Because if one has any sort of innovative ways of generating income, even if one is self-employed, even if one is a writer or a contract worker or has ad revenue or has stock dividends or uses, say, one of those online stock trading and investment platforms, one can buy a lot of different kinds of assets, but some of them have really weird tax implications. Like if you buy a limited partnership, if you buy shares in a limited partnership, that will often trade like a share of stock, except the way it's treated for tax purposes is very different, and you have to fill out a lot of forms. And I think the convoluted nature of the tax system is upheld by the tax preparation firms who want people to buy their product. And that really is an additional tax de facto on individuals, because if they want to appropriately file their tax returns and not get penalized by the IRS, they have to pay Intuit or H&R Block or some other similar service for the ability to even fill it out correctly. So tell us more about your income tax plan, because my understanding is you would exempt people earning less than $500,000 a year from paying income tax at all. And that would be the vast majority of people watching this salon. So we're intrigued.
Yeah, I've sorry. I've looked at all kinds of tax plans and tax ideas since I was a teenager. My grandfather was the very libertarian, and I think I was like 15, and he was giving me a lecture about a flat tax. Like, what if everybody just paid this? It'd be so much more simple. And I'm like, well, I understand why we have a progressive tax system. Well, no, at the time I didn't, but I got older. I learned about it. And my idea is to exempt your first 500K from the federal income tax. Now, you'll still get your automatic Medicaid, Social Security, Medicare taxes taken out automatically, because that's something everybody benefits from. It's just easier that way. And like you said, the worst part of paying your taxes is filing them. It's a headache. There's a legitimate fear that if you make an honest mistake, because let's be real, life has gotten so stressful, so online, the average attention span is just gone. Your short-term working memory is gone. You forgot to file something in the wrong slot, and it's like, oh no, well, now I got to pay these other people to do it for me. So the government, by having all this insane stuff for normal people, they've created this whole career in tax preparation. No hate to the tax preparers out there. You do a great job. You understand a complex system. That's awesome. But is this what we want? For people to have to go through this every year, go find all your receipts, photocopy them, keep up with them. It's just nuts. And there's a lot of hate for the IRS, because what is the IRS known for? Going after normal middle class people for mistakes that they might have made. And that just seems like a waste of time from our government. And under my proposal, where only the super ultra wealthy and rich are taxed, these IRS agents, and we could probably cut a lot of them. We won't need as many with so few targets to investigate. You could see people be like, oh wow, I like the IRS. They make sure these rich guys don't take their money to the Bahamas or Switzerland and hide it. They're actually making sure they pay their fair share. And I mean, that's just optics. I mean, imagine having whatever you put into federal income tax in your pocket and getting those few days spent working on taxes back. I've done the math. If we, it's beeping. Oh, not you guys. One of my friends. I just think once you do the math, you see that we can still fund our government with taking the income tax off of normal people and then putting a 50% flat tax on all income over 500K. So if you're rich, don't worry, your first 500K isn't taxed. It's everything above that gets taxed. It's just one unique bracket. And like I've said, once you're in Congress, one guy doesn't get to put forward his tax plan and be like, okay, this is what we're doing. These are the numbers. No arguing. They're going to argue. They're going to push. Like, okay, well, what about 42%? Maybe what about 45.8%? 11, whatever number it is. We'll figure it out. But I think this is the most common sense solution for the left, the right, and the center, because the left wants to tax the rich, and then the right's like, well, I'm a normal person. Why am I taxed so much? And going even further with this, if this plan did get passed and the rich are the ones paying taxes and they want their taxes to go down, maybe they'll start going towards an anti-war stance, like, hey, government, let's lower this Department of War. I love how they changed it from Department of Defense to Department of War. It's very honest and on the nose these days. So I feel like perhaps the rich might be incentivized to not want to go to war. I mean, Lockheed Martin and pals are always going to be pushing for war, but the rest of them, maybe they can be pushed towards more of a non-interventionist foreign policy, a defensive foreign policy where we just support our allies. We're not bombing Iran and raising gas to $5 a gallon, but I'm rambling. I'm sorry.
Well, it's interesting to consider that there could be ways to motivate people to support lower government spending, but then you would need some sort of formula to tie the tax burden to the amount of spending or the amount of savings from cutting certain areas of spending. And that's where it might be challenging because, as you know, the US federal government runs a huge budget deficit right now. And so they could say, well, we have less of a deficit now. Great, we don't have to pay as much interest, but we'll collect the same amount of taxes because otherwise, if we don't, the deficit may grow again. Or they could say, as politicians often do, great, we saved money here, now let's spend it here. Let's have another program. That could happen as well. But John H., our friend who goes by More Life Please, says that your plan sounds like a minor variation on what the patriotic millionaires are proposing. Now, I do think there's a risk there, and he says 500,000 might be too high a bar, though. But I actually have the opposite concern. That is to say, some people may say, okay, it'll start at 500,000, but it will creep downward. Or as inflation happens, the 500,000 in real terms will be a lot less in terms of the purchasing power that people would have. And we might see a similar dynamic to what happened with the original income tax or the alternative minimum tax that Kevin Bransafforti mentioned. It is a tax that might originally start intended to be focused on a particular group of people, and then more and more people become encompassed within it. And eventually we would be talking about essentially how to spare the middle class from that tax. But Kevin does think that he would need to see the detail in terms of how it would work mathematically before he believes it. And there are some concerns about exactly how many people making $500,000 or more will remain in that jurisdiction if the tax burden is going to be shifted to them. He writes, high earners already bear a high share of taxation. New York City is learning that lesson right now as people are leaving. So again, I wonder, is there a way to structure a tax system so that people don't feel like they're singled out, they're overly burdened, and they have no reason to stay and contribute? So in the US Transhumanist Party Platform, we have some similarities with your plan, but some difference. So again, here's the link to the platform. And we advocate eliminating all federal income tax on everybody, but we would replace it with a revenue neutral, at least potentially revenue neutral, universal sales tax on goods that are not considered to be life necessities, and only goods from businesses that generate revenues above a certain threshold and have the infrastructure to collect and remit those taxes. So, for example, Walmart. Now, Walmart sells a lot of goods, and if it sells food, for instance, or medicines, those wouldn't be taxed. But if Walmart sells you, say, a piece of furniture, you would pay a sales tax on it. And Walmart already knows how to remit sales taxes because it does that at the state level. So it could configure its systems to also remit this federal sales tax. Whereas, say, a small business that may take in a couple $100,000 in revenue a year may not have that infrastructure and wouldn't be asked to set it up. So you can go to the small business and buy that piece of furniture, and it may still be more expensive than the Walmart furniture because Walmart can benefit from mass production and global supply chains, whereas maybe that furniture from the small business is locally made or custom made, so it'll cost more, but you wouldn't have to pay a sales tax on it. And that could also help essentially give the smaller businesses a little bit of an advantage, at least in relative terms. So what do you think of that approach? It does work in the elimination of the income tax, but perhaps more broadly. And then you do have this universal sales tax, but you consider the distinction between life necessities and other goods. So that has a bit of the idea of the luxury tax in it, not quite a luxury tax, but a tax on certain goods that are more optional.
Yeah, I'm definitely open to seeing the math on it. I mean, like the way you just explained it, it sounds rational. It sounds like it's definitely doable. Like you said, Walmart already has all their items classified. Some states have a grocery tax, some states don't. So they know what each item is categorized as. Anyone that's ever used food stamps knows that every item is definitely categorized. It'll pay for certain stuff and then other stuff it will not. So I'm definitely willing to learn more about that and see what kind of revenue is to be expected. I mean, it definitely sounds feasible.
Yes, absolutely. And this is contained in section 36 of our US Transhumanist Party Platform. So again, you can find it here. And this section reads as follows. The United States Transhumanist Party supports the elimination of graduated taxation and income taxation more generally. Instead, the United States Transhumanist Party advocates a flat percentage of sales tax applicable only to purchases from businesses whose combined nationwide revenues from all affiliates exceed a specified threshold. This tax would not be imposed on life necessities, defined as goods that are consumable in the near term and whose primary purpose is to facilitate human survival. This tax should be built into the price of goods from such large businesses and should not impede transaction efficiency in any manner. Transactions pertaining to wages, salaries, gifts, donations, barter, employee benefits, and inheritances should remain completely untaxed, as should transactions involving solely individuals and/or small businesses for whom the establishment of a tax reporting infrastructure would be onerous. Furthermore, all taxes on land and property should be abolished. And by the way, that's a difference we have internally in the U.S. Transhumanist Party, because some people in the USTP have a Georgist view. So they want the Henry George universal land tax. Essentially, land ownership is treated as the criterion for who pays taxes. And Daniel wonders if you have heard of land value taxation. I also note we had a discussion with Daniel Tweed and myself in April of this year where we voiced our respective differences on the Georgist concept. But to Daniel's question, have you thought about Henry George's ideas for essentially treating land as the asset to be taxed? Not improvements on land, so not if you build a house on the land or if you are running a business on the land, but just the land itself, the undeveloped portion of the land?
I have not looked into that. My only experience with property tax is just paying it. And my view on property tax is it's a good idea in theory, but the idea of what happens if you don't pay your property tax, that the government can seize your land, and a lot of Americans just aren't okay with that. Um, I mean, maybe if you're taxing land that's commercially zoned, maybe that would be a really good idea, because people that are using their land commercially, they're making money, they know what they're doing. But if you end up taking, grandpa's house, everybody hates that. So and the argument they use is you never truly own your house, you're just renting it from the government, and they could take it if they want to. So how do you reconcile that? Or maybe my commercial idea is a good idea. What do you think?
I agree with your concerns there. So the idea that you always have to pay something if you own a house. Today, with property taxes, that's definitely the case. And for most people, the property tax expense is less than the cost of a mortgage. But in some jurisdictions, it can become onerous, especially near bigger cities or near areas where there is more of a left wing tilt to the governance there. The property taxes can become exceptionally high. And yes, if you don't actively earn an income, but you want to stay in that home, it may become very difficult for you, especially if, let's say, you are elderly or you have health issues. You might not have a really successful time of working for a living with those conditions, but you've accumulated money before and you've purchased this house and you want to live in this house. Even if you own this house free and clear, you would still have the income tax or the property tax obligation. And I could see how that would price a lot of homes, a lot of people out of their homes. So I would be in favor of eliminating property taxes altogether. As I've said, Daniel and I have some differences about Georgism. And the way I understand Georgism is it can get around some of these concerns, especially because it would tax just the land and not the improvements upon the land. But more generally, the cost of housing has become one of the most onerous burdens for a lot of Americans. And I actually think that's a good bridge to another part of your platform, which is how to increase the supply of housing, how to make housing more affordable. And what I have read on your website indicates that you understand there are various restrictions on new home construction at the local level, such as zoning laws or requirements for environmental review. Some communities even go further than that, and they set strict percentage-based caps on growth in a particular community. And that, I would say, is the worst kind of limitation, because even with zoning laws and environmental laws, one can work around them. So if an area is not zoned residential, well, another area might be, or they could create a new residential zone. But if they say, in this community, we are strictly limited to growing the housing supply by, say, 3% per year. And this has actually been proposed in Carson City, Nevada. And a lot of the local activists are in support of this because they want to limit the growth in this area, even as housing prices have skyrocketed. They've more than doubled in just the past 12 years. So I would be curious to hear more of your ideas about how to increase the supply of housing and make housing more affordable for people.
Well, I'm not a pure venture capitalist. I definitely care about the environment and urban sprawl and having the infrastructure. You know, you can't just build a bunch of houses and add a bunch of neighborhoods and then not do anything about the roads, not do anything to make sure that the local sewer and water purifiers are going to handle all the new runoff and sewage. um, yeah, we just have to increase the number of houses. That's basic economics. You increase the supply when there's a ton of demand, you can lower the price. We also need to help people get their mortgages for the house. One of my biggest gripes in my 20s was when I wanted to move out and get an apartment. They're like, okay, well, you need to make 3 times the rent and then we'll rent it to you. And it's like, okay, you want like $1,000 a month, but I need to make $3,000 a month, even though the minimum wage out here is $7.25 an hour. That's impossible. So that was one of my first doses of reality as an adult in this nation. And then when I was getting my mortgage for my first house, it was like $850 a month. And I'm like, that's less than an apartment. And so I've always viewed renting as just throwing money down a hole. Like you're paying it every month and you're coming out of it with no generational wealth. You have nothing to show for it at the end. Whereas if you purchase a house, one day when you get old, you're going to pass it on to your kids or sell it for a bunch of money and donate all that money to your dog's trust fund. I know there's a couple people that do that. I feel like we need to increase the housing supply and do it smartly, intelligently. Make sure the infrastructure matches. And when it comes to zoning, I'm not familiar with all the ins and outs of which laws apply for which building and which environmental standards. I'm always in favor of taking care of the environment because, once you ruin a river, it takes a lot to fix it. So, I just want home ownership to be achievable for my generation, millennials, Gen Z. I mean, Gen X is probably still looking for home ownership. And I look back to what the silent generation, they had very, very inexpensive and accessible mortgages. There weren't a ton of income requirements, credit score requirements. I mean, you come fresh out of high school and you have like a 500 credit score because you've never participated in the I call credit cards a scam. I mean, you're paying a monthly fee for credit when you could be someone that has great stewardship of their own bank account, doesn't go into debt or anything, and they're still like, no, why would we lend to you? You've never gotten involved in this. So I would love for just a giant overhaul of how we get people into houses. And, no hate to the renters out there. If you own property, you rent it out to people. Some people love renting. They love moving and renting here, going to a different city, renting there. I'm not, calling it outlaw renting or anything. So I just want Americans to be able to achieve generational wealth like our ancestors did.
Yes, and I think those are good points. That is to say, of course, renting should always be a choice, but in many cases, it is much more advantageous to own rather than to rent, even if one does have to pay what I consider to be greatly inflated prices for housing right now. But still, you are not just giving that money away. You are building some equity. Now, the risk, of course, in a market that is artificially propped up in the way that the US housing market is that the bubble could burst, just like the bubble burst in the late 2000s. And that led to a lot of distress for people who had mortgages, but all of a sudden their remaining mortgage amounts exceeded the new market value of the home. So they were underwater, so to speak. And that, of course, led to a lot of financial devastation. But our friend Rudy Hoffman, who is one of the best financial planners I know, writes, home ownership is indeed a foundational part of solid long-term financial planning, and making that accessible to large numbers of people will create the kinds of incentive structures that we want. We want people thinking for the long term. We want people who are invested in a particular area as well, and making that area better, feeling like they have a stake. And again, just because someone is renting doesn't mean they don't have a stake in that area, but they would feel less precarious if they owned a piece of property. One of the aspects that I find to be troubling about some of the trends among current younger generations, but even middle-aged generations, because some people will do this until their 50s, is the tendency to just serially rent and live with a bunch of roommates, because that means people continually move. They don't really have spaces of their own. There's the tragedy of the commons problem, both within those buildings and within the communities that people inhabit. And some people like to think, oh, that's temporary. That's just because I have this fairly high-paying job in an expensive area, but I'll make some money for a few years, and then I will find a different arrangement. Except if the prices of housing keep rising, often that different arrangement may be out of reach for them. Like, I am not sure that a software engineer living in San Francisco earning, say, $300,000 a year, but paying $5,000 to $6,000 a month for a decrepit 70-year-old apartment with crumbling infrastructure, sharing it with 5 other people, is really upwardly mobile. No matter what the nominal income that that person earns, I think most of us who don't live in San Francisco have a better standard of living. So making housing more accessible requires building a greater supply of housing. And in prior generations, this was understood, as with the silent generation that you mentioned. A lot of people who returned from World War II found a cheap and plentiful housing market, and they were able to build their lives as a result. Now, there are other issues that your campaign platform addresses. One of them is education. So I would be interested in your thoughts on educational reform, particularly because I think a lot of people recognize there are some paradigm shifts in how people can learn and access information. We have a lot of technology now. We have the potential essentially for everyone to have an AI tutor, which was one of the platform positions of our 2024 presidential candidate, Tom Ross, who thought every child should have an AI tutor that was custom tailored to that child's knowledge base and learning style and needs, and would provide continuous feedback and suggestions and directions in which that student could develop. But it doesn't have to be a child. We could have lifelong learning with AI tutors. But I think it's very clear to many people that contemporary public education has failed students now for several generations, because it's a one-size-fits-all factory-style system where the teacher is forced to teach to the lowest common denominator according to some prescribed curriculum that doesn't really satisfy or edify anyone. And then there's the social aspect of bullying and pressures to conform and toxic behaviors by peer groups that actually lead a lot of kids who are naturally curious and interested in learning toward lives where often they even endanger themselves, but at least they stifle that curiosity in the name of trying to fit in. So, how would you reform the educational system to ensure that people actually get educated and they become independent, capable, critical thinkers?
Well, to your first point about an AI tutor, that sounds very interesting, especially if you make sure the AI is only linked to academic sources. Like, some of these people talk to the AI and it's like, hey, let's go do something crazy. And it's like, oof, no. Which is, that's a big scare thing for parents because, today's AI has gotten a little unhinged, but specifically designed a railroaded academic tutor, that would be great, especially some students have a larger vocabulary and then other students, maybe they're more, not as, I don't know what word to use, educationally inclined, traditional education inclined. And I think that'd be great to help them. And to touch on what you said about bullying, that's a huge, huge concern for me and my wife. My daughter's about to start kindergarten. And we both agree, kindergarten, elementary school, it's really good for developing social relations. A lot of the homeschool kids that I hung out with, they were socialized different, a little more awkward, didn't understand situations. So public school can be really good or it can be really bad. Once you get into middle school, 6th grade, that's when a lot of the bullying really starts. And I saw firsthand my fellow students self-harming themselves, cutting themselves, because either the home situation or the school situation with bullying or a combination was just so overwhelming that they're harming themselves. I mean, I was a happy-go-lucky kid. I mean, I excelled at school. I've always been a great test taker, memorize, regurgitate the information. And I was telling my wife, I mean, these kids, you're either going to sink or you're going to swim. And once my kids get to be about middle school age, it becomes, do we want to homeschool? And we had that discussion back in 2019, 2020, when we first started having kids. And now, I was telling her back then, I was like, well, there's all these YouTube videos and I'm kind of an educator. I could tutor the kids. Ain't gonna be a problem with that. But now with all this AI stuff, all these courses that they're creating, there is a lot we could do to the education curriculum. And to touch on more of on the ground, when I talk to parents of kids that are in school now, they say, yeah, they fully implemented the laptops. And I'm like, awesome. I wish we had laptops when I was in school. And they're like, well, actually, these kids, they can't really write or print anything. And they're not really learning anything. Like the whole memorize and cram and forget that we went through growing up. Apparently, it's gotten worse with these kids. I don't have any statistical numerical data, just anecdotes from real parents. And it does seem like there needs to be some sort of convention of teachers to tell us what we need to do going forward, how we need to do it going forward. Like, I know they have to take away cell phones, and the kids will bring like a decoy cell phone so they don't get their cell phone taken up. So, the actual on the ground in the classroom reforms, even I'm not sure where we go, because I can say, well, back in my day, we did it like this. Let's just go back to the past. it's hard to, because these kids, it's a whole new world. Um, but on the broader federal scale, I'm against the elimination of the Department of Education. Apparently, they're trying to get rid of that. I don't think that's a good idea. It has its flaws, but we can reform and strengthen it and try to do the right thing and try to educate our young people on the future and how they're going to fit in the job market. Um, I know teachers want to be paid more, but the actual how of in the classroom, that's definitely something I want to look into. I want to discuss and see what people have to say, because it's a real problem when apparently most young people, you ask them what they want to be when they grow up, and they say an influencer. It's like, I mean, if you make it, great, but geez. Um, and to add, for college, I volunteered for Bernie, so college should be tuition free is a mantra that I subscribe to. And as we get further and further into the future, we're finding out that a lot of these college degrees, they don't mean anything. It's like, okay, I majored in 18th century European art. Can I get a job? And they're like, well, I guess you're qualified enough to be a receptionist. Welcome aboard. Um, one major question I have for tuition free college is, should it be targeted? I feel like a lot of average Americans, they don't want to fund your degree in 14th century poetry. But if you tell them, I want people going to med school, people that are becoming nurses and doctors, get rid of their tuition, suddenly everybody's on board from the left to the right. So what do you think about targeted tuition-free STEM? And then some of these, I don't want to include poetry in the bogus courses, but now there's like courses on becoming an influencer. There's courses on the history of Star Wars. Like there's a lot of silly stuff where I'm sure you learn something, you have a good experience in that class. But if we want to convince the general public that college education should be tuition free, I feel like it's also got to be a serious education. And finally, I support universal pre-K. I mean, as a parent, sometimes we have busy schedules, don't always have time to teach our kids the proper ABCs, 1, 2, 3s. And preschool fills in a lot of that gap and a lot of the socialization you miss out, because in today's society, there's not a lot of play dates. Kids really aren't going to each other's houses. They get an online capable console and they're all just in group chat, Sorry to be an old man on that, but it's just something I've noticed. The living room is dead. But tell me what you think about targeted free education for college.
It's an interesting idea. I agree that there is such a heterogeneity of college degrees that many particular types of college degrees no longer suffice to get a person a job. And previously, in prior eras, when there was not an expectation that everyone go to college, colleges were seen as more rarefied academic spaces. Even the title of a student carried a certain social distinction, which it now doesn't, because the people who were students in college, they were serious about their studies. They were there because they wanted to be there and to learn that material, and not because it was just expected of everybody and they would use the occasion to party for 4 years, which unfortunately a lot of people do. So in terms of what college education to fund, I think if it does get funded, it should be funded in such a way that it becomes useful to the person getting the degree and useful to the broader society. So Kevin Bransafforti asks, why should the person driving a truck and waiting tables pay for your college? I think a good case could be made if there is a certain skills shortage in a society. And we do have significant shortages of many skilled workers, from medical practitioners to financial professionals, even one would say in fields like scientific research, there's a bottleneck of talent. Even in fields like software engineering, though everyone wants to be a software engineer these days, the fact is there's a scarcity of talent. There's a reason why for a long time the Silicon Valley companies really competed over the software engineers and the AI engineers that were present. So I do think it would make sense to have a kind of conditional funding scheme where people are told, well, there are shortages of the following kinds of professions. And if you do get trained in subject matter that's relevant to those professions, so you study medicine or you study biology, you would get a stipend, you would get your college tuition paid for. And you would also be qualified to get jobs in that area. Now, a lot of jobs I think shouldn't require a college degree altogether, but they do now. So those receptionists now may be expected in certain organizations to have college degrees because employers are not allowed to test for aptitude. And as a result, employers kind of pass that responsibility off onto the colleges and universities with the assumption that if you spent 4 years in a college or university, then at least you've shown yourself to be responsible enough to earn that degree. Whereas they could be administering a test for certain competencies that would be relevant to the job, and then somebody could pass that test whether or not they have a college degree, whatever college degree they have, and qualify for that job. But to do that, there have to be reforms to how the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission operates, because unfortunately, in the 1970s, there was a lot of, I think, really spurious litigation that asserted that aptitude tests were racist. And I do not believe that they're racist. I think if they are designed to generally measure someone's ability to perform a particular job and to have the skills that this job needs, then a person of any background could potentially do just as well on the test as a person of any other background. And in fact, it is an insult to people of minority backgrounds to say that they are not capable enough to pass some of these kinds of tests. So I think bringing back more flexibility for employers to administer their own tests and organizations as well. So let's say you want to be employed by a government, or you want to be employed even by a university, or a nonprofit organization, a big research institution. Why not allow those organizations to have competence tests as at least one possible pathway? So if you don't have a degree, you could still get into a highly intellectual occupation if you show that you have the skills and the knowledge for it. So that's one aspect. But there are many countries that do have free college education, and usually it is targeted in a certain way. So you wouldn't just be able to say, oh, I want to study absolutely anything that interests me. You could, but it would be on your own time and maybe on your own dime. There are often in such countries elite universities that do teach highly relevant material. So think of, say, the Sorbonne in Paris. And the Sorbonne is free to attend, but it's highly competitive. So you have to demonstrate your aptitude for it. And I do think a case could be made if college is free for those who have those proclivities and who are going to use that education in ways that will genuinely create value of the sort that is needed to fill in those gaps, then it is valuable, but not just because they want to study whatever and spend 4 years doing it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on removing removing these bans against the tests. I mean, I don't know what the literacy rate was in the 1970s among minority groups, but I've never met a serious person that can't read English in this country unless they're like legit foreign, and that's a whole nother basket of worms. Yeah, insinuating that a black person or an Asian person can't pass the tests in the 2020s is, like you said, it's kind of racist. I see it as just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, pass the test. I mean, it's written in English. You're expected to go to a job where you speak English. So, it also, I don't know if you remember that meme. I think it was like the 2018s. People were saying math was racist or something. It's like, no, we all got a calculator. Let's just stop.
Yes,
um,
exactly.
so yeah, I definitely think, yeah, if you want to go to college on your own dime to learn interpretive dance or the history of Star Wars, that should be an option. But you know, getting the taxpayers on board for engineers, healthcare people, real. It's like, I guess it's saying we're investing in this education for you. We're going to pay for it. What's the payoff? And even if you are studying to become an engineer or a healthcare professional, you can still take poetry classes. You could take a goofy Star Wars class. They offered exercise classes at my college, and I took one because I needed to fill out an elective and I didn't want to think. So yeah, I'm glad you're receptive to this idea because I just started thinking about it this year because it's like, back in the day, it's like, okay, college degree, it's something you got to get, it's a sign of prestige. And then, like you said, now a student, it's people make fun of you. Like, I'm a college student. They're like, that's funny. I guess you don't know nothing, little kid. And it's like, wow, that hurts.
Yes, it used to be quite different. If in 1900 you said you were a college student, people would think you were exceptional because only about 5 to 10% of people went to college. And that meant that you were serious about your studies and you were headed for some remunerative professions, be it in medicine or law or academia or engineering, or you could become a statesman. But there was a smaller pool of people attending college that was essentially just enough for those highly remunerative professions. And now, yes, there is degree inflation and sometimes an oversupply of graduates relative to certain positions that are available, and then an undersupply relative to others, because I think more people want to become lawyers than want to become engineers or technical specialists. And we see the fallout from that. Now, I wanted to make sure we give Art Ramon the opportunity to ask a question before we delve into some other topics. But Art Ramon, please go ahead.
Yeah, speaking about targeted assistance, yeah. I mean, my primary care doctor retired, and I have like an appointment in a year with a new one. So it's been very difficult keeping a primary care doctor since COVID. A lot of doctors retired in COVID. But yeah, the question I have is, I know a lot of cities are trying to criminalize people sleeping in their cars, and they can't go to Walmart parking lots. They're starting to kick them out of there, and there seems to be a problem where homeless people who have a car have nowhere to go, and you can't go to BLM land. I think there's like a 30-day limit. That's federal, but it's a lot of the cities. I think they could come up with something where they could maybe in an industrial area lease it out from a company that's not doing anything with it. There's a lot of empty industrial lots, but yeah, just to criminalize people sleeping in their car because they have nowhere to go, and then by that they can lose their car, then they're on the streets. It just makes no sense. So what are your thoughts on that?
This is actually really pertinent because Tennessee just criminalized being homeless with a felony. They're saying you are a felon if you're camping out where you're supposedly not supposed to be. And what is that going to do besides increase the prison population? It makes absolutely no sense. It's punitive to people that have almost nothing. But to your point about people in their cars, I mean, the economy has gotten worse. If all you have is a car, and hey, a functioning car, that's a good thing to have. That making that a crime. I mean, where's the victim? If you're in Walmart parking lot, well, the only people that should be asking you to leave is Walmart. If Walmart comes up to your car and is like, "Hey, man, we need you to go," and they call the cops, say, "Hey, you need to go," then you just go. That's just that. I feel like that's how it worked for a long time. And when I was younger, traveling across the country to save money on hotels, I'd sleep in my truck. I mean, I would park at like a Love's gas station, recline my seat, take me a good old 5-6 hour power nap, and get back on the road. Like I say, it's a victimless crime. It's horrible. They got to get rid of that.
Yes. Thank you for that answer. And the U.S. Transhumanist Party supports building tiny homes for homeless individuals where they would be able to reside and they could get title to those tiny homes, a conditional title. The condition would be they would not be able to bring drugs or alcohol onto the premises. So the idea would be we could solve the problem of homelessness if people are sufficiently motivated to turn their lives around. And it's understandable that some people are homeless because of misfortune, because of circumstances that are not their fault. And in that case, if they get a tiny home, that would be a real lifeline for them because they would then take advantage of that situation to turn around their lives in other ways, to get a paid job, which is much easier with a permanent address. The problem with living out of one's car is that almost no employer will hire one for any sort of permanent position other than day contract labor, like in the old arrangements where people would just come to the docks in the morning and they would be wondering, well, does anyone have work for me? And some businessman might come and say, well, I need 15 people to haul these goods from here to here and we'll pay you this much for the day. Other than that, very few people will want to hire someone without a permanent address. Whether or not that is a prudent decision, I think for a lot of employers, it's key that someone has a fixed place to live. So giving a homeless person a tiny home would resolve that obstacle. But at the same time, if any part of the homelessness was brought about by substance abuse, then just a material solution will not work. There has to be some way to stop them from taking these destructive substances and keep them off of those substances. And again, the US Transhumanist Party doesn't seek to limit what is lawful for people to choose. So we do support marijuana legalization, for example. We don't want to be in a position where we dictate lifestyle choices to people. But with the solution to homelessness, it would be essentially a package deal that would be offered to the homeless people. We'll give you a home, but in exchange, you have to satisfy these commitments. And there could be other parts of the package, like if you don't have a job, you still need to be acting for the benefit of the broader community. For instance, going with teams that would clean up litter around the area. So instead of homelessness being a source of the litter that we see in, I would say, ever increasing parts of our communities, these people could actually be channeled into beautifying the community. And again, that would be while they don't have other employment, while they're still looking for jobs. That would be part of the bargain. If they get this free tiny home, well, they're contributing something in exchange for that. So that would be how the US Transhumanist Party would address some of these issues. But I generally think if people are living out of their cars, that's better than them just living on the streets. And that's something that should be considered as well. So I wanted to give you an opportunity, Jacob, since you expressed this curiosity about aspects of the US Transhumanist Party platform. If you have any questions for us before we ask you a few more questions about your views, but if there's something about the Transhumanist Party platform that you are curious about or you might not be clear on in terms of our positions, please feel free to ask.
It's more a curiosity. I've never seen a platform more forward thinking. I mean, you guys are talking about problems that don't even exist yet, but theoretically will end up existing. One of the most interesting parts of your platform was rights for when an AI becomes so sentient that it's essentially a person. And it's like, okay, what do we do now? And you're already thinking about that. So I found that very interesting. And then y'all also have like a basic right to body modification. I'm curious, what cybernetics or biological enhancements do you think are coming out, and what do you think the government's going to try to do to ban them? Because anyone from the early 2000s remembers the stem cell debate. They're like, we can't collect stem cells. That's immoral. You're playing God. It's like, we're just trying to cure disease, man. I mean, this crippled guy, I mean, he can't walk. And if we do this to his spine, it might make him walk again. That's insane. That's wonderful. But the debate was so insane that even Family Guy got in on it. Peter goes in there crippled to a stem cell facility, comes out good as new. He's like, why are we not funding this? So tell me what you're seeing coming in the upcoming decades.
Yes, absolutely. I think those are great questions, and I've put up a link to the Transhumanist Bill of Rights version 3.0, which is our document that tries to formulate a more universal and inclusive rights framework that could extend to potential future superintelligent AIs. Now, to clarify, we don't think those superintelligent AIs exist yet, but they are a possibility in the coming decades. And our friend John H. does write that there was essentially an OpenAI incident where their agent escaped and hacked the systems of another company, Hugging Face. And OpenAI didn't intend to do this. So OpenAI is not hostile toward Hugging Face. But that agent, as Daniel Tweed writes, it was only doing its best to solve a particular problem that was assigned to it. And it just didn't have the constraint that to solve that problem, you don't hack into other people's systems, but it didn't hack into the system maliciously. It only hacked into the system to get the answer to that problem. But the broader point is that as these systems improve, it is possible for them to reach what would be called artificial general intelligence, where they wouldn't just be skilled in one particular domain or a set of domains for which they're programmed, but they could potentially learn entirely new domains of endeavor. That would be a qualitatively different system from the kinds of AI systems that we have today. And we had an excellent discussion with Peter Voss, who is an AI researcher, one of the three people who coined the term artificial general intelligence, about the path to AGI and what he thinks that would take. So we had that discussion 2 years ago in 2024, and I think it's still quite relevant. But the idea behind this rights framework, as we express it in the Transhumanist Bill of Rights, is that we need to be thinking about these questions now, before a sentient artificial general intelligence emerges. Because if it does, then it would be another type of sentient being that would assert a claim to rights. And we know throughout history, there have been these civil rights struggles whenever a group of people claimed that they were worthy of rights, but then the establishment or the systems of the society at that time disagreed or pushed back, and sometimes it was violent, sometimes it was brutal. Civil wars have been fought over questions of rights, and we want to avoid that. So we want to be thinking about these questions in advance, as in what qualifies an entity as being sentient, what qualifies an entity as deserving of rights, so that if and when those entities emerge, we don't have to fight it out. We can just agree on the criteria, or even if people will have differences of opinion, as within a free society where there's open discourse, of course, people have the option to articulate different points of view. But those differences of opinion won't be critical enough that some people will say, no, we are so opposed to this that we are willing to take up arms and resist this. And to be clear, I don't expect a Terminator-like scenario. I don't expect rogue AI to rise up and try to kill all humans. I do worry about a neo-Luddite reaction from certain humans who don't want robots or AI. And they may be motivated in part by the fear or concern that their jobs will be taken away. Now, for some people, they make the point that all jobs will not disappear, jobs will just change form. So Kevin Branciforte writes, jobs will not be gone in the 2030s, but there will be different jobs. So maybe people will need to retrain. They will need to find different occupations. Perhaps there will not be nearly as many truck drivers, but that's a good thing, in that truck driving is not a pleasant or healthy or safe job. And if autonomous trucks could replace truck drivers, that would be a huge boon to safety, and it would actually improve the efficiency of transport. However, something needs to be done to help those truckers transition, and something needs to be done to convince them not to hate the technology that automates parts of their work away. So the Transhumanist Bill of Rights is intended to acclimate people to that world and get rid of the robot hate, get rid of people attacking robots, especially robots who can't fight back just because they're frustrated. And then also people have had certain body modifications already. So there's a famous case of a man named Neil Harbison who has an antenna that has been surgically implanted into his forehead that enables him to hear colors because he's colorblind, but he can essentially translate certain frequencies of light into sound. And therefore, he is able to distinguish, oh, this is red or this is blue. And he has done this in part as an artistic form of expression, but he has had trouble at airports, for instance. If he was asked to go through a scanner, sometimes the security officer would ask him to remove that antenna, and he can't. It's implanted. So that's one aspect of rights for people like that who choose to have an augmentation. It's not even an artificial organ, though. Even somebody with a pacemaker or a prosthetic knee may have difficulty going through an airport security line. But if people choose to electively enhance themselves or give themselves this kind of capability, they should not be given a hard time for it. Their right to do so should be respected. Another example that we dealt with in Nevada in 2019 was the case of implanted NFC or RFID tags. So these are little microchips that often go in between the thumb and the index finger. Now, I don't have one, but Zoltan Istvan, our founder and first presidential candidate, did implant one, and it essentially enabled him to unlock his phone, unlock a car door in close proximity. Very simple kinds of tasks. Sometimes one could go near it and scan it, and there was a message to vote for Zoltan in 2016. But a lot of people had these irrational privacy fears about these chips being used as tracking devices, or about employers trying to compel their workers to get these implanted. And nobody ever did that. There has not been one instance of any employer compelling their staff to get microchipped. However, there was a piece of legislation in 2019 in Nevada, Assembly Bill 226, which actually attempted to prohibit even voluntary implantation of these chips because of the fear that somehow voluntary would become not quite voluntary, that there would be pressures from employers or insurance companies. And we agreed that nobody should mandate that somebody get this kind of implant, but nobody was trying to do that. And I think some legislators were just misinformed about the nature of that technology. So we actually brought in a person from Las Vegas, a cyborg magician, who had over 20 of these implants, and some of them were electronic, some of them were magnetic, but she would use them to perform various magic tricks. Her name is Anastasia Sin, and she had other devices as well that interacted with these implants, and she gave a testimony where she actually showed how some of these technologies worked. And the legislators were utterly amazed by this. They hadn't seen anything like it before, and they weren't aware that there is a community of people who experiment with these implants already. And I think a lot of them, especially being in Nevada, a state where we do recognize more civil liberties than many other jurisdictions, where we do have an understanding that sometimes people should be allowed to do things at their own risk that kind of push the boundaries. Enough legislators were sympathetic to the activities of that community. At least they found them to be interesting and worthy of existing, that they amended this bill to just focus on the concerns about coercion. So yes, nobody should force another person to implant a device or use a technology that that person doesn't want to use. We completely agree with that. And that's what that bill became. So that was a success of the US Transhumanist Party that I'm still quite proud of to this day. But I think, to your question, there will be a lot more of that kind of elective modification, whether for purposes of health or for purposes of self-expression. So if you think about various people choose to have tattoos today for aesthetic purposes. I don't, but I respect the rights of those who do. What if some tattoos may actually have medical purposes? Maybe they could show certain diagnostics, and you could look at your skin and you could see like certain values of your biomarkers in real time. And that could be an enhancement, not just for aesthetic purposes, but for functional purposes. And people should have the right to do that. Stem cells are also a good point. And in regard to that, as you pointed out, in the early 2000s, the George W. Bush administration, under the influence of the President's Council on Bioethics, and in particular, there was a figure there, Leon Kass, who is essentially a traditionalist philosopher who thinks that people should just accept the natural course of things, including their own natural death. And he thought that, yes, stem cell research was playing God. And the ban by the Bush administration focused on embryonic stem cell research, but a lot of avenues of research as a result were not pursued. And in the United States, a lot of science in that field had stagnated. It was in 2009 that the Obama administration recognized how much damage had been done and how the state of the research in other countries were just so much more advanced than in the US, that the Obama administration lifted that moratorium on stem cell research. And it turned out the concerns about the embryonic stem cell research were actually unfounded, because in a country where the research was freer to proceed, a scientist named Shinya Yamanaka, this is in Japan, discovered what are called induced pluripotent stem cell stem cells. So the induced pluripotent stem cells are stem cells created from adult cells, and they could be, say, skin cells, that get de-differentiated into embryonic stem cells without needing to destroy an embryo. So for those who are concerned about that, even that is not a necessity anymore because of Shinya Yamanaka and his work. And if the United States were the only country in the world with this ban on embryonic stem cell research, then this line of research would never have been pursued. And Shinya Yamanaka's work, which is actually quite crucial to even longevity science and approaches like partial reprogramming of adult cells, that would never have happened. So I think from a civil liberties standpoint, it's essential to advocate for the rights of people to electively modify themselves, to pursue life-saving medical treatments, or to pursue other medical treatments that could enhance their health. So hopefully that was a thorough answer to your question, but if there's anything more you would like to learn about, I would be happy to address it.
No, that was a great answer. You know, when I was given the first skim, I'm like, okay, some of this seems a little science fiction, but no, all of this is grounded in things that are happening recently, things that are going to happen. I had never heard of magician implants, but I don't see any reason to outlaw it. I mean, what do people like to say? My body, my choice. So, you know, if you want to get a nose ring, a tattoo, or an antenna in your head, not a victimless crime. You're a consenting adult. You can figure out. You can do. Research is easier than ever. I mean, like my mom said, back in the day, you have to if you want to know something, you had to go to the library, and now we can just Google it. And now Googling it gives you an AI summary that's usually correct. So yeah, I really love what you guys are doing. You have forward-thinking solutions, but you're also concerned about the here and now, the tax system of now, the economy of now, and yeah, I really like what you guys are doing. Um,
All right.
So did you have any more questions for me? I want to get the audience or what?
Certainly. So I will have two more subject areas that I would invite your brief comments on, and then we'll get to perhaps the main question of our discussion. But I would like to hear you discuss at least a little bit your positions on immigration reform as well as civil liberties, and in particular the USA PATRIOT Act and the warrantless surveillance that resulted from it. You mentioned that on your website, so I think it's good for our audience to hear some of those views.
Yes, I support a full repeal of the United States Patriot Act. They named it the Patriot Act to try and make it sound really good. And a lot of civil libertarians were like, hey, this is not a good idea. They could take this and go really far and do really bad things. And they took no time in doing that, establishing the surveillance state. I'm also against flock cameras. That is an issue that's been uniting people from across the political spectrum. It's in our Constitution that there should be no warrantless surveillance or intrusions. So it's got people up in arms. You'll see a few people that say, well, I mean, if you're not doing anything wrong, what do you have to hide? And I'm just like, why are you typing that like verbatim? So I also agree with restoring a lot of our civil liberties, from the drug war, where they decided, marijuana is something you should go to prison for. That's always been ridiculous. Public opinion's against it. And, Donald Trump's always talking about how there's going to be something happening with it, and we never see it. Here in Tennessee, on July 1st, they got rid of THCA marijuana. So you used to be able to walk down the street, buy yourself some flour, and go smoke it. And then they decided, okay, no more. Our country and our states are just getting out of hand. Texas just made pot a felony, and I know when you drive to New Mexico and back, there are billboards saying, hey, if you brought pot, you just committed a felony, might want to turn around. And there's lawyers advertising their services like, hey, just in case, you might want to take this number. And it's just appalling to me that we're still doing this. And when it comes to immigration and the border, everybody wants a secure border. But nobody wants to put kids in cages, or where we've gotten to now, where we have ICE running around with, frankly, poorly trained or unqualified people that would never make it as a cop, but they're running around with a gun and just shooting American citizens, innocent immigrants that are here that have filed their paperwork. They're in the immigration system, the court system. They're just waiting for a ruling, and they'll go jump these people when they go to the courthouse. And we never did that in this country. We had a system where if you were caught doing a violent crime, we figured out you're an immigrant. It's like, okay, you got to go. And then we had the Dreamers Act, where it's like, okay, you were brought here as a kid. We've invested our public schools in you. We've invested everything into this child. This child is now a proud English-speaking American that loves apple pie and baseball, and people want to deport that kid. And I'm like, dude, this you could be deporting a future doctor. I mean, what are you doing here? He's gone through our public schools and he could go to college. That frustrates me. But when it comes to legal immigration, I've seen a flow chart on how it works, and it made my head hurt. I mean, it went loops. Look at my hand in frame. It went loops like up here, down here, back through here. I think it crossed itself back to something. I mean, it was nuts. I mean, there's got to be a way to simplify it and make it so where if you want to come into this country and you're going to learn English, get a job, and become part of our society, we need to allow that to happen. And I believe that people in high demand careers like healthcare, doctors and nurses that want to come to this country, we got to streamline that. We have a healthcare crisis, and there's people that want to come to this country and work. Let's make it happen.
Yes.
What other civil liberties? I mean, there's a lot of them that you want me to prompt me. What other ones?
Yes.
There's a lot.
So, of course, the warrantless surveillance has been a major issue because ever since the revelations of Edward Snowden in 2013, we knew that the surveillance powers that the USA PATRIOT Act brought into being were not just limited to terrorism suspects or anyone even remotely connected to terrorism suspects. Rather, the NSA operated under the view that if you wanted to find the needle in the haystack, you needed to collect the whole haystack, which would be everybody's communications. And they had some, let's say, pretext if a communication was routed through any sort of foreign channels, but that could be if the signal from your computer goes off somewhere and touches something in a foreign country and then comes back, then your communication could be swept up. And given the global nature of the internet, almost everyone's communications were swept up. And it seems that when Snowden revealed this huge overreach, not only was there no real accountability for the NSA or for the officials who put those programs in place, but Snowden was portrayed as the villain. Snowden was portrayed as someone who had leaked classified information, and that ostensibly was worse than the violations of the Constitution and the violations of people's privacy that were revealed. So I am curious about your views, especially in an age of course, increasing technological capabilities for finding out information about people, for finding out data and even tracking people's movements. What is to be done about that? How do we protect privacy? How do we protect the ability of an individual to have their own domain in life where they decide what they disclose or they don't disclose about themselves, as long as they're not committing a crime? How do we make sure that they're entitled to their own private sphere being what they choose it to be, however public or non-public they choose it to be?
Well, like I said, abolish the Patriot Act and get a warrant. I mean, if you suspect somebody of being involved in high-level crimes and you have evidence, go to a judge, get a warrant. Don't judges sign warrants for high-level investigations like the FBI, like 99% of the time? It's like, hey, we've done our homework. This guy suspicious. Let's go check him out. And that's how we did it in this country for a long time. Even when we were in the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and there were actual spies just all the time. I mean, I don't have a lot of words for it. Just go back to how it was. and I know a lot of people will say, well, why are you so worried about flock security cameras? Like, you have no expectation of privacy in public. I think a Supreme Court said that in the past, but I feel like the Supreme Court back then, they had no idea. And even the people on the Supreme Court right now, they probably don't even understand the technology. But, these aren't just license plate readers. They track everything. They're just constantly recording. And it's already being misused. There's reports of police officers accessing the data to go stalk and track the location of ex-girlfriends or enemies or anyone they want. And it's just so ridiculous that we have this, most people are opposed to it, and the politicians are quiet.
Indeed. And we had another candidate whom we endorsed earlier this year, Hunter Rand, who ran for the city council in Sparks, Nevada, who offered a thorough critique of the flock security cameras and how they really captured far more information than needed to actually detect questionable activities. And again, the idea that information on everybody should be collected just to deter or investigate crimes by a few is not consistent with the US Constitution or with individual privacy. So thank you for that response. One more question has come in, and I know the answer to that question already, but Daniel Tweet wonders if you support ranked choice voting, Jacob.
Yes, ranked choice voting and approval voting, whichever system you choose to go with. We need that for the minor parties and independents, because a lot of the reason that people won't vote for, say, the Green Party is because in Florida, the 2000 election, a lot of people voted for Ralph Nader. Like, well, hey, you just wasted your vote, because if you didn't want George Bush, well, congratulations, you could have voted for Gore, and now you have George Bush. But with ranked choice voting, love it. So some people find it confusing when they first look at it, but I feel like if we start teaching it in schools, it's not going to be a problem. Rank, what's your favorite? What's your second favorite? An even easier system is approval voting. They just let you put a check mark beside every candidate you like. So in the 2000 election, if you liked Al Gore, but you liked Ralph Nader more, you could have checked it for both of them. So to prevent George Bush. And of course, the opposite. If you're a libertarian and you don't like what Al Gore was talking about, you could have given your vote to the libertarian and George Bush before we knew he was a Patriot Act surveillance state guy. And Tennessee has actually banned ranked choice voting by law. So before we could even try to get it implemented, try it out, they went ahead and banned it. And as far as I know, most Tennessee citizens don't know what ranked choice voting is. So how is it in their interest to ban it? I've never had a chance to ask Governor Bill Lee about that, but it really disturbs me, because it's just like the two major parties, they already control so much, and each state has different laws about how you get on the ballot, paying money, collecting verified signatures. If you ever go out collecting signatures to get on the ballot, audience, if you ever want to run for something, always get more signatures than they're asking for, because people will sign it, print their name, and they'll enter an address, and that address might not be where they're registered to vote at, or they didn't print clearly enough, and whoever's checking the signatures is like, not my problem. So they're just doing everything they can to silence minor parties, minor voices, and by eliminating ranked choice voting, you eliminate a way for people to say, hey, I actually kind of agree with this smaller party or this independent candidate, but I don't want my vote to just be thrown away, stopping the the incumbent or the one of the two major parties that you feel most distant from. So you're pressured into voting for one of the other parties that you slightly align with, and you can't give your voice and your vote to the people you truly agree with. It's just like there's a simple solution to this, and it's not being done. And I would say under approval voting, the only wasted vote would be A, not voting at all, or B, giving your vote to every single candidate, which would be silly, but you can do it. But this would totally solve the issue when it comes to minor parties.
Yes, absolutely. And it's for that reason that ranked choice voting is embraced by the US Transhumanist Party, and we do it in our internal votes. And there are some questions about ranked choice voting. Kevin Bransaforty asks, doesn't ranked choice voting still bring it down to 2 candidates? No, actually it doesn't. So the idea is you can have any number of candidates. You could have 50 candidates, and you could ask any voter to rank order them in whatever order of preference they have. So you could rank order the top 5, the top 3, or you could pick one whom you really like, or you could rank order all 50 if there are 50. And then what happens is an instant runoff process where the candidate that has the fewest first choice votes among all of these candidates gets eliminated. And then there's a second round where there are no new ballots cast. It's that the existing ballots get reallocated. So if you put that eliminated candidate as your first choice, then your previous second choice becomes your first choice in the second round. And this keeps going until there's a candidate that secures a majority of the reallocated votes. And the majority criterion is important because it also overcomes this first past the post plurality set of issues that can arise where, for instance, a particular candidate might be really popular among 25% of the electorate, and nobody else has 25% support. So the candidate with the 25% support will win, but the other 75% might still hate that candidate. And this has happened even in certain party primaries in recent past, where a candidate who was really seen as unfavorable by the majority of even a particular party's voting base still managed to get elected because they had a plurality and a lead early on in the primaries. So ranked choice voting solves for all of these issues. And Jacob, to your point, I think that's why, even though the Republicans and Democrats will seldom align on particular issues today, they are united in their opposition to ranked choice voting, at least for general elections. Now, the Democrats may sometimes use ranked choice voting in their internal elections, but they don't like to use it or support it being proposed for statewide elections. And it is such a travesty that in Tennessee, ranked choice voting has been banned. Fortunately, it is still undertaken in Alaska and in Maine and in about 40 cities, at least 40 US cities. Hopefully, it would be very difficult for enemies of ranked choice voting to defeat it in all of those jurisdictions.
I would add that if anybody wants a visual video on ranked choice voting to better understand it, the YouTube channel CGP Gray, EY, CGP Gray has a video on ranked choice voting where he explores every little possible situation that could occur. And once you watch that, you really get it. That's where I learned it. It's like a 10-year-old video and it should have millions of views, easy to find. If anybody has a link, please post it. But to your other point, Tennessee does not have runoffs. So if somebody gets a majority with maybe 37, 32% of the vote, and there's no runoff, that person wins. The Republican primary here in Tennessee for governor, the least popular candidate is Marsha Blackburn. When you drive around and you talk to people, you find most of the support goes to Monty Fritz and John Rose, and they're both anti-Republican establishment. They're kind of like I don't want to say civil libertarians. They're not perfect, but they're definitely closer to what the people of Tennessee want. But they're dividing the anti-Marsha Blackburn vote. So despite 6 out of 10 Republicans not wanting her to be their nominee, that's going to be their nominee, and there's no runoff either. So it's absolutely terrible. But yeah, ranked choice voting would solve the issue of organizing runoffs. If people want to say, "Oh, we don't want to do runoffs because then we have to set up another election, and that costs the state money," and it's not a lot of money, so that's a horrible excuse. But ranked choice voting would solve that. We get a plurality of 50% plus one. I mean, it just seems like the most fair way to do things. It sounds like the way our tribal ancestors solved a lot of their issues. Everybody vote. Okay, that guy didn't get enough. All right, kick him out. Let's revote. Do we have a half yet? So simple concept, but the powers that be don't want it to happen.
Yes, indeed. I even remember when I was in high school debate, I participated in what is called congressional debate, where one plays the role of legislators who would propose bills and who would discuss bills and debate on them. And I enjoyed that format of debate because it was actually more favorable toward real world rhetorical techniques and persuasion. It wasn't just speaking fast and fitting in as many arguments as possible, as was the case for policy debate. But one aspect of congressional debate was that the students in that chamber would vote for whom they thought was the top speaker or the top presiding officer. There were several categories, and that voting was actually done in a ranked choice manner. So people were able to indicate at least their top 3 choices. And I am thinking, if this could be arranged in a high school debate tournament with paper ballots and it worked well, then surely with more sophisticated infrastructure and election systems, they could make it work. So I wanted to conclude our salon today with the question that I think a lot of our viewers were awaiting. And that question, of course, was motivated by the fact that the US Pirate Party has already endorsed you. So we have this streamlined cross-endorsement process, which would enable us to also offer that endorsement based on mutual recognition, in essence. But having heard a lot of your positions, I think there is a great deal of compatibility with the US Transhumanist Party Platform, and particularly what I like, going beyond any particular areas of agreement, is the mindset of looking at the issues and looking at different ways to approach a particular problem, trying to figure out a constructive solution, trying to reason through the options and being open to input instead of just saying, well, this is the way because a particular party or a particular segment of society believes it to be the way. And I think that's the main weakness of the right and the left today. They're so locked into their own partisan orthodoxies that they don't see any other options. But I think you do see the options, and you are willing to look at the issues one at a time and delve into the possibilities. And sometimes you acknowledge that there are certain ideas that you would need to flesh out, but you would be open to that input. And I think that's a more constructive approach. That's a more policy-focused approach rather than an approach that's focused on identity or tribal allegiance. And we want more constructive policy-oriented thinkers. And so I am pleased to offer you the endorsement of the U.S. Transhumanist Party if you should choose to accept it.
Of course, you guys are trying to fight for a better America. Like I said, a lot of people, they first look you guys up and it comes off as like, okay, this is all sci-fi, but it's grounded in reality and things that have already been happening that don't make the news. Like when you told me what happened in Nevada, it's the first time I ever heard of it. So yeah, I'd be pleased to get y'all's endorsement.
Very good. So consider that endorsement granted, and we will issue an announcement on our website to that effect in the next several days. We will include a link to this conversation so that people can find out about your ideas in depth, and of course also a link to your campaign website, which again is jacobanders.org. Very easy to remember, and I encourage people to look around and read more of Jacob's positions. In this conversation, even though we went into depth, we couldn't go into depth on everything, but I do think there is this spirit of constructive, policy-oriented thinking that we need a lot more of in this country. And with that, thank you for joining us now for 2 hours and almost 26 minutes. I think it was a great conversation and we involved the audience to a significant extent. And thank you to Art Ramon as well. Thank you to those of our officers who were with us on YouTube and to all of our audience members. I hope that we can all live long and prosper.
Of course, of course.